Welcome back to the channel. I'm Reed, and this is Man Cave Guitar Pedal Mania. For this special series, I'm building a telecaster almost entirely out of parts that I bought from guitarfetish.com. So as we learned in the last video, the body that I bought it's not usable, at least in its current form. So I'm going to have to work on it. And this is going to reveal my all too real limitations as a woodworker, but you get better by challenging yourself, right? The good part is if I ruin this body, I don't feel bad about it at all, and I'll just buy a real body and take it from there. So in the last video I mentioned that the controls don't fit, and looking at it a little more closely, you can see that here's where the actual width of the control cavity is supposed to be, and then it comes in about 1 millimeter for the rest of this route. Now 1 millimeter doesn't sound like a lot, but it's enough that it makes that control not fit. So I'm going to take a Dremel and a sanding drum, try and clean up all of this junk that they left inside the control cavity, routed out that extra millimeter, and see if the pots will fit in the cavity. And then I'm going to see if I can take off enough material from the bottom to fit in that switch. And I gotta be honest, I don't know if it's physically possible to take 5 mil off of this thing without punching right through the bottom. So we're gonna find out together. Okay, you know the old adage, measure twice, cut once. So let's measure. All right, the inside of that control cavity is exactly 3 centimeters. And the body is 4 centimeters. So theoretically, I can take off 5 millimeters of material and still have 5 millimeters left. That's not a lot of room for error, but it is doable. So let's see how this works. For the first part, I'm just going to be using a Dremel, a flexible end, and a sanding drum. Goggles. Even though I wear glasses, I'm going to put on shop goggles, which fit uncomfortably over my glasses, but they at least fit. And a hat to keep my hair out of the way, because I've been letting my hair grow a little longer, and if I lean forward and it gets caught in the Dremel, bad times. All right, I'm going to turn off the audio. Okay, that worked pretty well at cleaning up the inside of this, although I haven't really started sanding it out to widen it yet. Before I do that, I'm going to take my control plate and mock it up with the pots and switch on it, and mark a rough outline past which I know I can't go. So we'll just pause the video while I work on all that. Alright, as you can see, I have attached the pots and switch to the control plate, and after removing enough material that I can fit the pots in, just barely, the switch does fit in much better. As you can see, it's still, well, maybe you can see, it still is about 1 millimeter above the surface of the wood. But that means that there's a lot less wood that I have to remove, and that is great. I mean, it shouldn't be necessary at all, but since it is necessary, this is the best possible scenario. So let's give that a shot. I would feel bad about overreacting earlier, but whether I'm taking off 1 millimeter or 5 millimeters of wood, the fact is I am still fixing this control cavity so that basic controls fit in it. That is not the way this is supposed to work. So first, shop pencil. Yeah, there is a really big lip on this, probably much larger of a lip than it needs, and that's because somebody didn't route this thing out correctly. All right, gonna do a little bit more sanding, so I'm gonna turn the audio off again. Sure, this video is going to be a little disjointed when I go to edit it together. Miracle that these tiny little wires aren't snapping. Okay, so the pot's fit. Now I just need to remove about a mil, maybe a mil and a half worth of material at the bottom so that I can fit in the switch. All right, we'll take a pause while I change Dremel attachments. Let's give this another try. Now, I really prefer sanding to routing. I feel like I personally have more control over it. So I'm going to try this flat bottom sanding attachment and see if that gets me where I need to go. Okay, that certainly removed some material from the bottom. Let's see if it was enough. I know you may be yelling at the screen going, it's the wires, but the wires have to go someplace. And they're coming out of the pickup cavity and coming in right about where, right where the switch ends. So I don't see any way I'm going to not have some wire under that switch. But no, that's still, just needs a tiny bit more, just a tiny bit more. We're almost there. Okay, hopefully that will do it. And I can't just route out a trench because remember, I'm going to be changing this control plate so the switch is at an angle. So I have to have the entire front of the cavity available at a depth that will allow me to use these controls. Okay, success. I now feel like that is not actually resting on top of the switch. Just feel like that would be really bad. Okay, so we have accomplished one task. Task number 2 is going to be the forearm and belly contours. So I have never attempted to carve a forearm cut before, so this is going to be interesting. Now, it's really hard to take precise measurements on a curved surface, but I did look at a Stratocaster body that I have, and as best I could determine, forearm cut was about 2.5 inches at its deepest point. About 2 inches from kind of my reference edge here on the end. Mark that on both sides. And about 2.5 inches on the other side. Okay. Mark that on both sides. Now, also, it was sloped to about half of its width. So the width there is just over 1.5 inches. So I'm going to take it down to, I don't want to be too radical, so I'm going to take it down to about 1 inch. And then, this is where we test my art. Okay. So, we'll be removing this material. An experienced luthier probably do this in 2 minutes. Put it on a bandsaw, take an orbital sander and smooth it out and everything will be fine. I don't have a bandsaw. I do have an orbital sander and I have a handheld spindle sander, and between the two of those I think I can get the same effect. You'll notice though that arm cut still puts this edge knot in front of the slope. If I put the notch over here, well, I'm not sure what I'm going to do about that yet. I'm going to think about that. In the meantime, my little shop has limited ability to deal with dust, so I'm moving this whole operation outside. If it turns out that I am unable to get good camera footage outside, then I will just bring this back in after I have done the sanding. Well, that was absolutely fascinating. I'm very sorry I was unable to share it with you. Seriously, I shoot these videos by myself, and trying to set up the camera outside and the changing light and to get it far enough away where I don't ruin the camera with sawdust and yet still be able to film stuff while I'm using power tools, it was all too much. So I'll show you the final result. So I have given it a very, very mild but functional forearm cut, and likewise a very mild but functional belly cut. So that feels pretty good, actually. It's not nearly as drastic as you would find on an actual Stratocaster body, but given my level of experience in use of handheld tools, I'm actually pretty happy with the way that turned out. It still needs some final sanding, but as my next step is to light this thing on fire, I think I'll leave the final sanding until after I torch it. Okay, so I've sanded out using my Dremel the control cavity, so now it fits, if only barely. That should never have been necessary. And I've made forearm and belly cuts. You notice this giant edge destroying knot is still there. So we'll see what happens when I torch this. That Bondo or whatever is in there is probably going to turn toxic. I will wear breathing protection while I'm doing it, and then I'll just see how I'm going to handle that. May end up refilling it with epoxy or something. So I hope that you have found this interesting. I'm sorry that I couldn't show you the sanding piece, and I will. The next video will be fire, so stay tuned for that. I'm Ben Reed. This has been a special edition of Man Cave Guitar Pedal Mania.